My dear Playbills, welcome to the episode that Louis Armstrong, Bobby Darin, and Ella Fitzgerald don't want you to hear. It's Monkeys and Playbills, y'all!
Hello, everyone. Are you confused? I am. Let's get to it. No, I'm just kidding. Hi, everyone. I'm Jillian Willems.
I'm Paul DeGurse, and joining us in studio today is the outstanding Debbie Patterson.
Hi, everybody.
I'm so thrilled you're here, Debbie. Thank you for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here.
Really quick, you're a performer, director, writer, producer, administrator in Canada's arts community. You're based here in Winnipeg, same as both of us.
Yep.
And would you say maybe one of your main artistic activities right now is running Sick and Twisted Theatre?
That's one of my main activities, for sure.
Which is absolutely rad. You've been in 2 separate productions of the Threepenny Opera?
I have, yeah. Which is weird.
The only 2 productions ever done since the 30s, and you were in both. Yeah,
I was in both of them. Yeah.
For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is a show about Broadway musicals that ran for 100 performances or fewer.
And what the heck happened?
And today we're talking about Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill's Threepenny Opera. Definitely the oldest show we've ever talked about on this.
I think so.
Probably the most influential as well.
Oh.
This would be one of the 5 core shows that created the Broadway musical.
And I think that is something I'd love to unpack with the 2 of you, because the great debate is this even a musical? So
there's so much to talk about.
Also, you're about to hear me attempt the German title of this play. The Threepenny Opera, or Die Drei Groschen Oper. I think that's pretty close. That's okay. It opened at the Empire Theatre on April 13th, 1933. It closed on April 22nd, 1933, after 12 performances. Ooh. Now, specifically, this is the New York production, so we'll get into a little bit more of the history. But yeah, those are our stats for the American premiere of the stage show.
Great. First things first, before we delve into a debate, we like to go through the plot of the show, kind of bit by bit, to make sure that our listeners are on the same page as us. I usually try to summarize because I'm pretty absent-minded, and it's very difficult for me. Debbie, if at any point you would like to chime in and help me summarize, by all means, please do that.
Okay.
This is going to be especially tricky, I think, for me, Debbie, because the production that we worked on together was not in the order that this show is typically performed in. Or at least there were a few modifications from what I can see. And maybe this is the case with both your productions.
Maybe. We used the same translation, so maybe it was the translators that had their way with the scene order.
I believe that's exactly the case. I believe that's 100% the case. All right, so this is going to be as close as we can get to the Mark Blitzstein translation of Threepenny Opera, which is different from the Jeremy Sams translation, which Debbie and I are both very familiar with. We're going to get into all of this. If that didn't make any sense, it will soon.
It super didn't make sense to me.
Okay, Jill, do you want to put 5 minutes on the clock? Or producer Daphne?
Your time starts now.
So we open on a stage that is not necessarily blank from what I understand. Usually it has a small orchestra on the stage. And this singer appears, this street singer, sings about this real bad guy. This guy, Mac the Knife. And Mac the Knife he lists all the... Mac the Knife kills people, Mac the Knife steals, he sexually assaults people. He's just the worst. They're in London. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of like a prologue type thing, because then we move into the top of Act 1, the first of 3 acts. And we're in, it's like a shop. It's a shop that belongs to these two called the Peachums, a man and a woman who are a couple. Because this Threepenny Opera is all about class. It's about higher class people and middle class and lower class, and people who are really struggling to make ends meet or unhoused. And the Peachums are lower class, but they have a lot of status. They have a lot of control over other people.
They're kind of like pimps for beggars.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly
it. They run all the panhandlers And they help them with their panhandling act by dressing them up. So they're like pimps for panhandlers. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, and they have a daughter. They have an adult daughter named Polly. And we soon find out that Polly is engaged to marry this Mac the Knife guy. We cut to Mac the Knife's secret hideout where him and Polly are going to get married, and they're waiting for Mac's gang to bring back all the stuff for the wedding. They just went and stole a bunch of food and a whole bunch of shit to have the wedding. And so the gang gets back, they have a wedding, and then after the wedding, Polly sings. They're like, oh, we need some entertainment. We need some entertainment after this wedding. So Polly sings a song called Pirate Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
This song, like a lot of the songs, don't necessarily advance the plot in a purely narrative sense like you would expect out of a Broadway musical, but are kind of these cabaret performances with themes that elaborate on ideas that the play is presenting. It's awesome.
Mm.
So we had Pirate Jenny. And then these are big long scenes as well, because this is like a very old style of writing. These are not the quick scenes that we have in musical theater. So we're still in this scene, and they're like, "Oh shoot, the chief of police is here." And this chief of police, Tiger Brown, shows up, but then it turns out he's not there to arrest them. Him and Mac are actually buddies who used to be in the army together. Like so, there's all this corruption and everything. Finally, Polly heads home and tells her mom and her dad, Mr. and Mrs. Peachum, that she married Mac, and they're like, "Absolutely not. That's a disaster. You should absolutely not do that. He's a really bad guy."
Well, and mostly they're worried that he's going to try to take their money. It's not their character.
Yes, absolutely.
He's going through the daughter to get their money.
Totally, yeah. It's not compassionate at all.
Yeah. And so then they conspire to break them up or to get MacHeath arrested.
Exactly. So, and I believe that's the end of Act 1?
Yeah.
So then we're at the top of Act 2, and Polly goes to Mac and is like, "Mac, you gotta get out. My parents are going to get you arrested." And so Mac says, "Yep, absolutely, that makes sense. I'm out of here," and leaves Polly in charge of his gang. Mrs. Peachum, Polly's mother, bribes Jenny, who is a new character we haven't met yet, a prostitute who is like used to be Mac's lover, and like they have like a known relationship. Mrs. Peachum bribes Jenny to turn in Mac, betting that he's going to go to her. He totally does, and gets turned in. So now he's in jail.
And while in jail, his wife shows up.
Yes!
Not Polly.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's
absolutely.
right.
Yes.
And his wife is Tiger Brown, the chief of police. His daughter is married to Mac the Knife.
That's right. So
and now he's also married to Polly Peachum.
So yeah, that's right. Lucy shows up, then Polly shows up as well, and they have a kind of a fight. And then Polly leaves, and Lucy gets Mac out.
Yes.
Springs him from prison.
Yeah.
And now we're into Act 3, where
he gets arrested again.
He gets arrested again. Tiger Brown shows up and arrests Mac for some reason, and because he's going to be executed. He's going to be killed.
Yeah.
He's put to death. This is very sad. Jenny has a song here.
10 seconds.
And then it's all about how the world is shit and you have to pay attention to people around you.
Yes.
We're going to get into it a lot. Okay.
So then he's about to be executed.
Yeah. No, let's finish it up. Let's finish it up. Yep.
He's about to be executed. Everyone is gathered to watch the hanging, and at the last minute, a messenger arrives from the king to say that he's been pardoned.
Yeah. But it's not a satisfying ending.
No.
It's very much like almost like a parody of a Deus Ex Machina kind of ending.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And not only pardoned, but he's given all this money and all this status and all this authority. Yeah.
It's a wild ride, is the honest truth. And it's, it was initially written in German at the turn of the century. So there's, even the most contemporary translation still has that feel of dialogue that maybe makes it a little hard to follow. And it's also sometimes tricky to follow because of Bertolt Brecht, the guy who wrote it, and what he's doing, which isn't always necessarily just telling a story.
Yeah, who claimed to have written it.
Aha!
Oh, yes,
I'd love to get into this too.
So it's actually an adaptation of an existing opera called The Beggar's Opera, and it was translated by Elizabeth Hauptmann, who was Brecht's lover at the time. So she was translating this opera written by John Gay, and it was written 100 years before that, something like that.
It's a much more traditional style opera.
And so she wrote this translation. Brecht was trying to sell a show to this theater producer, this impresario, and he wasn't interested in the show that Brecht was selling. And he said, "Well, I've got this other one. It's a translation of The Beggar's Opera." And this impresario was like, "Oh yes, I like that one. Okay, bring me your translation of The Beggar's Opera." So yeah, so that's kind of how it went. He passed it off as his own.
Right. Like he never admitted that he had not done was it an adaptation or translation? I guess both in a sense.
I believe.
Both. I mean, she was translating it. And then I guess some things probably changed it. He probably put in more songs. Like I think Pirate Jenny isn't in, like a version of Pirate Jenny isn't in the original Beggar's Opera, I don't think.
No, because I think a lot of that is kind of enter Kurt Weill, this other major creative force in this piece. Kurt Weill, who has already collaborated with Bertolt Brecht at this point in both their careers, I believe, and is, from what I understand, they find a mutual friend in each other by way of being two German dudes with a really similar sensibility about how the world is shit.
I was wondering what direction you were taking that in.
Like that's kind of it, with lots of love to both of them. Bertolt Brecht at this point is already like making a name for himself as a really interesting classical composer, and so steps on to write the musical adaptations and takes just a ton of influence from German cabaret.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's especially interesting about this piece to me. And maybe we can, you know what? Let's talk a little bit more about Bertolt Brecht and his style, his whole thing. As someone who works around theater people a lot, but never went to theater school myself, I'm wondering if you guys would like to riff a little bit on Bertolt Brecht.
Okay, I'm no Brecht expert.
My intro to theater history teacher would be appalled at my recall on Brecht. So all I know is that stylistically he was quite influential as far as like pushing the boundaries of what theater was at that time.
I think he's what we would now call meta, you know?
Yeah.
Like the kind of theater he made was kind of meta, you know, where it was always commenting on the fact that you're watching a play. So it's not, he didn't want people to buy in. He didn't want that suspension of disbelief. He didn't want that kind of engagement that we usually try to try to engage our audience in a certain way. He had a different approach to audience engagement that was more about, remember you're in a play, and don't, sort of insisting that you not sacrifice your critical faculties, that you stay critically focused on what the story is telling you, and not just sort of, relate to the protagonist and hope that the love interest, works out, and all those things we do when we're usually watching.
I remember being really disconcerted when I worked on the second production of Threepenny Opera that Debbie was a part of. It was co-produced by your company, Debbie, Sick and Twisted, and by AA Battery Theatre, another incredible couple of producers in Winnipeg. And I was lucky enough to be the music director on that production, and it was disconcerting coming from almost exclusively like Broadway style musicals up to that point, where we just give so much attention to getting the applause and getting the energy up in that room to drive through to the next number.
Right.
And that's not
what we're doing.
Not only is that not what's happening, you're actively working against that.
Yeah.
Like there's this element where you want the audience to be a little uncomfortable, like you said, so that they'll actually think about it rather than be lulled into complacency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And
don't enjoy yourself too much,
It's very weird. You compound that with the fact, though, that both Brecht and Weill are like undeniably really skilled at their craft, so it's engaging.
It is.
Like the songs especially are really good. So to work on the songs and have like just a tear down version of Pirate Jenny like we had in the production that we did, but then because of the way it ends, it shuts down applause, and you just have this void in the theater after it ends.
Yeah,
feels very weird.
It's very weird. Yeah. 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 All those places where you expect the audience to applaud, they don't, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's cool that you get a completely different reaction from, from an audience that's kind of trained to applaud it after a great musical number. But they don't.
Yeah.
Because it's not comfortable.
Because it's not comfortable. Because instead of, like, Pirate Jenny, for example, goes, it's like the end is, there's a ship in the harbor.
Oh, yes.
And it ends on this dominant chord, on this.
Yeah, it doesn't resolve.
But then it doesn't go.
Right.
Or whatever you would have to get an audience to get on their feet.
Right.
Like these tools that we use in the Broadway musical so effectively. You can just, like, you can guarantee they're going to be on their feet with the right ending. And this show guarantees they won't be. There is, there is no way people can applaud after that.
Yeah, he does that a lot where he doesn't resolve it. Yeah.
And nor did we want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's something so exciting about that because the expectation from the audience to participate in that way, like not every show warrants that, whether, stylistically. So it's kind of nice as a person who saw this specific production in, you said 2019, right?
I think that's when we did it, yeah.
I remember not needing to, if that makes sense.
Oh, interesting.
Because sometimes there's this compulsion to just do it, even if maybe you don't feel the need, but other people are doing it, or I heard a button, therefore that means, like you said, you're introducing that space. But yeah, I don't mind sitting in the quiet or in the suspension of those thoughts or the carry through of that story.
There's this other thing that Weill really didn't think that music could further the action of the play or give you background to the characters, like that it was just going to interrupt the action at the right time and create a little a diversion, I guess. Yeah. That it's not actually furthering the action of the play.
It's interesting because there's a few moments in the play that do further the action. Like there are things that you can look at them now and you're like, oh, people drew from, this was one of the things Rodgers and Hammerstein and everyone after were drawing from when they created the modern musical theater.
Yeah.
But a lot of it isn't. A lot of it is exactly that. Like Pirate Jenny, like we said in the synopsis, is there's a whole scene. There's a wedding. There's lots of dialogue, lots of ideas introduced. And now let's stop the action, literally in the show. Stop and you perform a number for us. A number that the text expands on the themes of the play, but has literally nothing to do with the action.
No.
Other than, is the Jenny in the play supposed to be Jenny?
No,
right?
No, they have nothing to do with each other.
So they just happen to have the same name.
Yeah. I know, it's so confusing. There's Pirate Jenny and there's an actual Jenny in the play, but they're different people. But what Pirate Jenny does in terms of the plot is it's a moment where Polly kind of terrifies Mac's gang. Like this gang of thugs are all like, holy shit, because she is so fierce. and that kind of allows her to take over the business later on. When Mac is leaving town and he says Polly's going to run the business, I don't think the guys would have been on side as easily if she hadn't proven herself already with this song.
Totally.
Right.
So that's kind of what it does, is it establishes her relationship to this gang.
Totally. So Threepenny premieres in Germany and people like it, from what I understand. Yeah.
Well, not at first, apparently.
Oh, great. Okay.
Like, apparently it was mixed reviews, and then it still ran for like 400 performances or something like that.
Right.
So maybe it was that thing where it was like people kept coming because every time you see it, it maybe resonates differently or becomes clearer to you, or... Yeah, I wonder if there was part of the intrigue of the play itself was what kept people coming back.
Sure.
Yeah.
So after that, after its premiere in Germany, kind of the next big move ends up being taking it to New York. But it doesn't go so well. And it's very interesting because the whole reason we're able to talk about Threepenny Opera on this podcast under the terms of our podcast is this weird technicality of its first Broadway production. Where it goes there in the 30s.
Yes.
Brecht doesn't go with it. Brecht has nothing to do with this other than he says, yes, you can do this. At this point, Kurt Weill's already moved down there. But I don't know that Kurt Weill has an especially big hand in this production either. Mark Blitzstein doesn't do the translation. This is a translation but that by all accounts is not very good.
Right, yeah.
And it just gets destroyed in the reviews.
Yeah.
Do we think the reason that this translation is not very good is because it was adapted into English by two of the producers of that play?
Oh.
And I'm not suggesting you cannot do both, but I'm just saying maybe there was I don't know. I speculate as to whether that might have had something to do with it.
Well, maybe now's the time to talk about the translation history of this piece, because it's really interesting, actually. I find the art of translation so fascinating. The art of especially translating songs.
Yeah.
A good translation of a musical theater piece that was written in another language, like the later translations of Threepenny Opera. Les Mis is probably the most famous translation that we have in our canon right now. The way that a good translation can take the intent of the original text and craft it in a way that it still works within the musical cadence. It forms like a similar kind of rhyme scheme that it maybe did in its original language, but does it by using new language, sometimes wholesale creating new language that serves the same intent that the original text did. I think it's an incredible art form. I think it's very fascinating. And so it doesn't surprise me that maybe an initial translation from two folks who are not passionate translators
Right.
would think, yeah, well, what do? You have a German to English dictionary, you go. And you and it would be that's a disaster.
Right.
The translation that most people know comes a few years after this, in the mid-50s, I believe, from this guy Mark Blitzstein.
53, 54?
Yes, I think so. And it's this translation that ends up being the translation used in the New York production that's like a big smash hit. And it's this New York production that ends up being in Greenwich Village. It's like an off-Broadway style thing. And that runs 2,000 performances. That crushes.
Cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, right? And Mark Blitzstein, very interesting guy as well, the composer of The Cradle Will Rock.
Okay.
Right? And so these are his two things. Is he wrote The Cradle Will Rock, which was right around then was another big deal and a very fascinating piece, and all about labor relations and worker relations, and does this translation that is definitely effective at telling the story of the Threepenny Opera. Then, in 1997, the Donmar Warehouse in England, in London.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And they're like a rad non-profit English theater is the vibe I get, right? Is they got a mandate, they do cool works, they're making
It's
it
a
happen.
really cool theater, yeah.
Got a mandate.
They got,
Sorry.
and like a good one, you know?
Okay, yes.
They do this production where they get this guy Jeremy Sams to do the translation, and he does this really cool, very contemporary text translation where it's kind of got this like very greasy Cockney thing going on. You listen to they made a really nice recording of it. You listen to this recording, you can just feel like you need a bath after you listen to it, you know?
That's what happens after all the best translations.
And so that's a version that becomes very popular because it makes the piece really quite accessible. Whereas when you listen to Mark Blitzstein's translation, there's still some of the translation doesn't quite, like, it's good. Here, I have an example. This is the end of Act 1. I have the Mark Blitzstein version here, and it's the end of Act 1, and it's the Peachums singing to Polly about, you shouldn't be with Mac. And there's kind of this refrain that is like it's a theme that sums up, textually it sums up kind of one of the themes of the show. And in the Blitzstein translation, it's, "Oh, sad to say he tells the truth, the world is mean and man uncouth." And in the Sam's translation, it's something that we can't deny, that life's a bitch and then you die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that fascinating? To, like, undeniably, they're saying, you can see exactly how they got there from a presumed German translation. But one using, like, lower language and just a little bit of a cadence switch is so much easier for at least my contemporary ears to understand like that. that's my kind of quick rundown of the major Threepenny translations that have happened. There's a few other adaptations. There was one in the late 90s that Wallace Shawn did.
Oh, cool.
That's the one that Alan Cumming starred in.
Oh, wow.
Where Alan Cumming played McKeith. By all accounts, it's very bizarre and takes some pretty significant liberties.
There was a production where Sting was McKeith?
Like in the late 80s, right? On Broadway.
89.
Wow. Yeah.
Cool.
Like, I mean...
Tim Curry was McKeefe.
Oh, that tracks.
Yeah.
Oh, he was probably incredible.
Oh, I would have loved to have seen
Sting,
that.
I'm not so sure.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to pass judgment. Like...
No.
Maybe I should reach out and just ask. How did that go for you?
So I wanted to ask, having gone through kind of this... a bit of a rundown here. What's everyone's relationship like with the Threepenny Opera? When did you first check it out? Had you checked it out before now?
I first became familiar with the music when I was in theater school, and we were doing a music segment, and we learned a bunch of the songs, but it was a different translation of the lyrics. It wasn't the Jeremy Sams translation. It was a Canadian playwright, and I don't know who. When Shakespeare in the Ruins produced it at the Warehouse, here in Winnipeg, we tried to use that translation and the estate wouldn't let us. But that was my first exposure to the music was through this music unit we did at theater school. And you know, a number of people learned solos from it.
Yeah.
And we learned some of the choral numbers. We learned the wedding song
Sure.
that the gang sings for McKeith and Polly. And we learned the Tiger Brown song.
Oh, like the army song. Yep, totally.
Yeah. But it was our last recourse is to join the forces.
Oh, sure.
See the world we never saw. Which was kind of a parody on a like a Canadian Armed Forces ad was see the world you've never seen.
Oh, that's so
join the forces.
funny.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And then we did a production at the Warehouse as part of Brecht Fest. RMTC was doing the Master Playwrights Festival.
Yep.
We brought in Richard Armstrong, who's an extended voice specialist, to work with us on the singing. His approach to singing is all about exploring the cracks, like looking for the parts of your voice that you think are ugly and really like digging into those and like finding the beauty in the ugly.
Hell yeah.
And so that's kind of where we started with the vocal approach to the production.
Oh, that's so cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
I kind of came at it a slightly different way. I came at it almost exclusively through the music first, but not knowing it was part of Threepenny.
Yes.
Through hearing like recordings of Mac the Knife, which kind of became this breakaway pop single when it was recorded by Louis Armstrong and then Bobby Darin in quick succession. It became this jazz standard. And so as I was growing up and studying jazz in high school and university, I kind of became familiar with this really fun jazzy song with these really bizarre lyrics. Then, you look it up and you see in the books, you get your jazz fake book and you've got the chord chart for Mac the Knife from the Threepenny Opera. I was like, oh, okay, well, so that's what that is, the Threepenny Opera. And that was honestly, like I gained a bit more knowledge than that. I learned that Kurt Weill was a composer and Bertolt Brecht was a playwright and they wrote the Threepenny Opera. But I couldn't have even summarized it, honestly, until the two companies mentioned before, Sick and Twisted and AA Batteries, approached me about being the music director for the 2019 production. And then I started doing some listening and doing a bunch of reading and thought it was very interesting. I listened to that Don Moore Warehouse recording of the Jeremy Sams translation a bunch and really dug it and thought it was cool. And then I remember going and checking out the Blitzstein translation, the recording from the 1950s, the recording of that off-Broadway production. And it's so fascinating to me how different it is and how hard I think it would be to get into it if that had been my first introduction. I think I really enjoy it now because I think it's fascinating and I can kind of see the cultural context of it. It definitely sounds like pre-Golden Age musical theater.
Yeah.
And that's not even a diss, but it's definitely a potential barrier to entry,
Right, yeah.
What about you, Jill? What was your relationship like with Threepenny Opera before
Sorry.
today?
I'm laughing because, like Paul, you called it like a fun jazz tune.
Yeah.
Mac the Knife, you called it like a fun jazz tune because my exposure to the music from Threepenny was only through that song. And only done by folks who sang it sort of like a lounge,
Sure,
like a lounge ditty.
Yeah.
And so I didn't fully understand how gritty it was until seeing it in context in the show. So I didn't super have a lot of information ahead of seeing the 2019 production that you both worked on. And I kind of loved seeing it because I went alone, which was wonderful. Like, I'm so glad I experienced it by myself. Yeah, I guess I didn't realize how gritty it was because my intro to it was like Frank Sinatra singing Mac the Knife.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you miss so much if that's your first experience, I guess, because it takes it right out of context and then you don't get the rest of the story, which is that commentary, that social commentary.
And not just even gritty, but like the whole piece is a really vicious indictment of capitalism.
Right.
It's not subtle. It's 2 middle fingers up the whole way through. You
Yeah.
know?
Which is why I thought it was so exciting to perform it with an integrated cast with so many performers with disabilities.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The ableism is rooted in capitalism. You know,
Yes.
the idea that if you have value in society, it's because you can work and produce.
Yes.
And if you can't work and produce, disabled people were termed useless eaters, people who consume but don't actually contribute anything to society because we don't work. Or some of us are unable to work. The indictment of capitalism is kind of cranked up a notch when there's all these disabled bodies on stage.
Yes.
And there's also the thing that Peachum does. He helps some of the people that he's employed to be panhandlers pass off disabilities so that they'll get more pity and make more money.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of play the crip card as panhandlers,
Yeah.
even if they aren't actually card carrying members of the community. They play that card, get money. So it's and the fact that the Peachum we had doing it was deaf.
Yes.
Was even more fun.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Is that one of the reasons why this piece is so enduring?
Yeah.
It's coming up on 100 years old at this point, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There are obviously in the theater tradition, there's lots of shows old and older than that we explore, but not many, and especially not many from that time period right there. And this show still, not only do we still produce it, we still see it, but when you see it, it feels vital. It feels electric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like a nice production makes you think about why are we still dealing with this? This play was written over 100 years ago. Why on earth does this still play so well? This shouldn't play this well anymore. This should be a relic.
Yeah. It's not obsolete yet.
No, exactly.
Oh.
There's some interesting conversation I've heard about the morality of even making money off productions of Threepenny Opera. At least doing Threepenny Opera in a theater company where people are not paid the same, or pay equality is not like fair pay is not in play for everyone involved in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Something fascinating in that, in something like Threepenny Opera existing in our current theater system, which is, even though it's an art system, it's a capitalist system.
Right. Yeah. That's a bit uncomfortable.
It's really uncomfortable when you kind of confront it. Hey.
Yeah.
But then also, I acknowledge that the words are powerful. It's a powerful play, but I'm also reluctant sometimes to deify Brecht and Weill. It's a whole bunch of stuff, and it's a play. I suppose it's a play that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
In that sense. So, I'm trying to think if there's any final thoughts to bring up here.
Well, you were talking about how influential you think this show has become. Where can you kind of see those influences in musical theater history?
It's awesome. Oh, I'm really glad you asked that, because the line is very clear in my mind.
That's great.
From Brecht, because there's a pause. There's a pause a little bit because Rodgers and Hammerstein do their own thing and do it so well and so solidly that it kind of for 10 years that's it. But then Kander and Ebb come along.
I was just gonna say Kander and Ebb.
And Kander and Ebb
yes.
dig Weill.
Yeah.
And you can hear it in everything Kander and Ebb do. From, obviously, Cabaret is the big one.
Yeah.
Because they're literally drawing on German cabaret music, which Weill was one of the major proponents of. So just by nature, it sounds like it. But also Cabaret takes a lot from Brecht. It's like kind of Brechtian. There's direct address. It's a hopeless show. It's not a fun show. Cabaret's surprisingly long and surprisingly uncomfortable to sit through for a hit musical.
Right. But it's the thing Debbie was talking about, the sort of like holding a mirror up to the audience in a sense, and then society through that.
100%.
It's really fascinating as a structure for what we sort of had grown to believe was like a very polite art form with you know, with beautiful scores, sweeping scores.
Yes.
And then it's like, oh no, it can be something else too.
And that's kind of the cool thing about Threepenny in general. You mentioned beautiful sweeping scores. It was originally orchestrated, and this is before the time of, please reduce this to 5 pieces for our orchestra. So this is Kurt Weill's intention. It was orchestrated for like 7, and it was mostly woodwinds and doing like woodwind doubling and tripling. So it's got this bizarre, open, stark sound. It's not lush by any means. It almost sounds, I don't want to say tinny, but like it's fragile almost.
Oh, sure.
That was that original orchestration. A sound that is so in contrast to what was happening on Broadway at the time, and then what happened with Rodgers and Hammerstein immediately after. So that's one place where the influence is. The other big one is this really fascinating piece that I'm sure you've both heard of called Urinetown. That's this very, very interesting musical from the early 2000s that never really got the credit it deserved on Broadway, at least. It's a mix between a parody and a very loving tribute to Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht in every aspect. Its music is very much not only written but orchestrated in this style. A lot of the songs take the old style, in quotes, approach of stepping out of the action and delivering a story song rather than a narratively driven song. There's a narrator character who direct addresses the audience through the whole thing. It's a kind of this dystopian world that is consumed by greed, and people fight against greed, but they don't really win. And it all kind of ends on this bizarre, sad note. It's a very fascinating piece that I don't think a lot of people got at the time, but is kind of this bizarre spiritual successor, almost sequel to Threepenny Opera written 75 years later.
I think the reason, too, that maybe folks don't draw that parallel, because I don't know that I would have until you said that. Like, sonically, it is quite contemporary. Like, it follows all the tropes of, like, what contemporary musical theater was in the early 2000s, that maybe there isn't that initial connection made.
Totally.
But in terms of circumstance, they are, yes, absolutely connected.
And it's interesting. I'd always known that it was kind of there. I'd heard that, but it wasn't until I began preparing for a production of Threepenny Opera, because I could hear the overture to Urinetown in my head, and it'd always been this bizarre overture where I was like, that sounds weird. Daff, maybe we can put a clip of it here. Because then you listen to the overture from this Donmar Warehouse production of Threepenny, and you're like, oh, that's what that is. Okay, yeah, totally. It's instantaneous, and it's very deliberate. Maybe we can put a clip of that one there now, Daff.
Don't tell me how to do my job, diggers.
Thank you, Daphne.
Who composed Urinetown?
Urinetown was composed by a man named Mark Hallman, with lyrics by him and a playwright named Greg Cottis, and the book was by Cottis. It's a very fascinating show that I think deserves a revisit. So, I don't know, does anyone else have any thoughts on Threepenny's influence? You see it in Sondheim as well, right? Sondheim is all over that, and kind of those, just the grown-up themes, and it's like a play with, like even Sondheim's musicals, undoubtedly they are musicals, but they're really plays with music.
Yes.
In comparison to what came before.
You're right. Yeah, I think of Assassins, I think of Sweeney. Because it really is the blurred lines, too, of like who you're rooting for.
Yes.
From the other side. It's really fascinating to put that on its head. And I think that's why I immediately thought of Candor and Ebb. But now talking about Sondheim, yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Not as much musically in that it's not drawing from like German cabaret as much.
Right.
But like just all the harmonic shit that Kurt Weill's doing, like all this. Like this weird chromatic spaced out. That's all some Sondheim stuff, you know? Like he takes from there all the time. I could talk about Kurt Weill all day. I think Kurt Weill's just the coolest composer.
Go ahead, Paul. No, I'm just kidding. I know better than to invite that. Should we talk a little bit about what I had said earlier, which was the great debate about whether we could even call this, like, what do we call it? How do we categorize this piece? Mm-hmm. Because there is this conversation surrounding, is it an opera? Is it an operetta? Is it a musical? And I mean, I'm not saying we need to decide, because I think there is beauty in indecision in this regard, but I just wonder if anyone has any thoughts or feelings about it.
I would like to take you now to me in 2018 asking Paul why he called our company the Village Conservatory for Music Theatre and asking him to explain why it's not called the Village Conservatory for Musical Theatre. So I think that, Paul, you cited this show as an example of music theater and what that meant and how you could have a show with music in it that is not a musical. And now I'm inviting you to say some pretentious things about that. Go ahead.
I would love to. So in my mind, musical theater is a term that has become synonymous with the Rodgers and Hammerstein style of constructing a show. And I'm not saying that as a shot in any way. That's an incredible way of constructing a narrative that weaves text and music together to act as one. Like, there's a reason it's so enduring. It rules. We use it to this day. Incredible musicals are being written that use the the Broadway Rodgers and Hammerstein style of musical theater. That said, that's not the only way of combining music and theater to communicate a narrative. I like the term music theater because it allows people to maybe let go a little bit of the expectation that it's going to be something Rodgers and Hammerstein style and will instead be literally something all you know is that it has music in it and it has theater in it. And they're going to play together. You know, is this musical theater? Is this not musical theater? I think there's no question it's not the Rodgers and Hammerstein style of musical theater writing. I think more importantly, I'd be really hesitant to advertise it as a musical.
Yeah.
Just from a producing standpoint, I don't think you get an audience who would be into it.
Yeah.
Maybe Debbie can speak to that a little bit.
Oh, sure. Someone who produced it a few years ago.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think they call it a play with music and not a musical, but I guess the form of musical didn't exist when it was written.
Yeah.
But it is a play with music. It's a different thing. It's more like a narrative theater and cabaret hybrid than it is a musical.
There's so much play. Like, there's a lot of words in there. There's a lot of text.
There's 3 acts.
And like, honestly, like 5 songs per act, and they're all like 3 minutes. Like, there's plenty of music in this, but the music to text ratio is pretty high. How do we as artists get an audience for a show that is meant to alienate them? / does it matter? Is that even the point? You know?
Yeah. Well, I just think it appeals to a certain kind of audience. I don't know, all the the curmudgeons and the cynics.
So what I'm hearing is semantics. It's semantics, because we don't have to pin it down. It's not about that. Like, this is like totally not necessarily related, but for me, I can identify more things that we have dubbed musicals. Like, I think of Company. I've never thought of Company as a musical.
Sure.
Like it is, but for me, it's always felt like a play with music.
Yes.
And so, if we sat down, I'm sure we would really, it would sort of challenge our perception of what we've deemed to be musical theater. Yeah. And I'm going to do that. All the musicals ever. Go down the list. Also, the Tony Awards weren't invented yet,
they weren't.
And that's all.
Nope.
But, sorry, normally, Debbie, there is a section of our podcast where we talk about the Tony Awards of that year, what was nominated, what won, and the Tony Awards were not a thing in 1933.
No.
So we don't have to talk about that. However, I have a fun fact. In the inaugural Tony year, Kurt Weill won for Street Scene.
Oh, really?
So it's kind of a fun little connection. I'm pretty sure 1947.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Wow.
Well deserved.
So good for Weill. Nice connection.
I know the big off-Broadway production, the one that did very well, took some... Oh, this is really embarrassing. We may have to cut this out. Jill, what are the off-Broadway awards called again? Those are the Obies? Those are the Obies, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
I'm pretty sure it took a few Obies. Kurt Weill's partner, Lottie Lenya, was in that
Lottie
production.
Lenya.
And she was Jenny, and she took a Obie, I think?
Oh, yes. Tony Award in 56. Yeah.
Was it a Tony Award?
Tony.
Oh, wow.
It was the only time an off-Broadway performance has been so honored.
Ooh,
That's so funny.
that's really cool.
That's really
Very
fascinating.
cool.
Yeah. Oh, so that's the Threepenny Opera. I think we're still seeing the ripples from it today. Debbie, thank you so much. This was really fun.
Yes.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it was our pleasure. Jill, we should plug Into the Woods.
Oh, sure. We could talk about that. I've started rehearsals today, as a matter of fact. I will be choreographing Into the Woods at the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre. I'm looking so forward to diving in to that music I love so much. If you couldn't tell by the only composer I brought up today, which was Sondheim, that I'm obsessed. No.
Like, it's a good other composer to bring up in a Kurt Weill Bertolt
I know,
Brecht
you're
discussion.
right. Yes, no, you're right. We're not too far off. It wasn't me trying to find a reason to talk about Sondheim.
Like every other episode.
Yeah. Oh, good point. But yeah, no, I'm super looking forward to it, and I hope that folks can come. We run, I want to say, January 12th to February something. So see you there.
And then I think the last things to plug are this podcast is supported by the Crescent Arts Centre, and this season is produced with generous support from the Canada Council for the Arts. We have 2 other podcasts also in this network of podcasts that the Village Conservatory is running these days. One is a mentorship podcast where we've paired a few emerging artists with a few established artists. They've worked together, they created something together, and they recorded podcasts talking about their experiences. That's called It Takes Two. We also, coming in the new year, Tales of the Great Transfiguration, the Village Conservatory's first new work commission from local playwright Ben Townsley. That's going to be a narrative podcast series coming early in the new year.
Cool.
Oh, yeah. Until then, please stay tuned for next time when we talk about... Sorry, I left the space so that Daphne could edit in what we're going to talk about.
It's better if Daph just keeps the tail end of that.
Yeah, sure.
That's my preference anyway. And then Daphne's gonna
Like, it's still gonna switch between you talking to, like, please join us next time where we talk about a strange loop. It's
Exactly.
just my noticeably not baritone voice.
That's what I was imagining.
I love it.
Please remember to rate,
Wow.
review, subscribe, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Night.
Hi everyone, this is producer Daphne speaking. Thank you all so much for listening to Monkeys and Playbills, the show where we take a look at Broadway musicals that had 100 performances or fewer before closing. To learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Monkeys and Playbills Pod, or email us at monkeysandplaybillspod@gmail.com. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/monkeysandplaybills. Visit spring.com and search Monkeys and Playbills to find mugs, t-shirts, hoodies, and more designs coming soon. Monkeys and Playbills is proud to be a Village Conservatory for Music Theatre podcast. Original music for the show is provided by Paul DeGers, and the show is produced and edited by Daphne Finlayson. We wanted to give a special thank you to the Canada Council for the Arts for supporting this season of Monkeys and Playbills. To learn more about the other podcasts in the Village Conservatory family, you can visit villageconservatory.com, or if you're on Apple Podcasts, visit the Village Conservatory channel in the app.